Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. This is our Basics on Belief first for the semester, so I'm really pleased to see so many people have joined us on Zoom and in person. Today we're going to be talking about paganism with our speaker, Holly, and she will be guiding us through this particular journey. This meeting will be recorded and it will be put up on our website as part of our resource section. So if that is something you don't want to be involved in, you're welcome to not speak or turn on your camera. But I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. So we will get started.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. I will talk to you, but also talking to the camera, so you can stand up here. So, my name is Holly D'Angelo. I'm one of the people who runs Happy Valley Golden Wheel. And I do classes and things for that. I've been involved in paganism for a while, since the 90s. I'd say the mid 90s or so. So I've been around a little bit, seen some things. So we're trying to summarize today to people who have, really no beginning knowledge of paganism as to what this is. Now, if you already know some stuff, that's cool, and I'm happy to answer questions. But we're just going to go through real basics here and just try to, just try to cover some bases about what this is, and hopefully answer some questions and all that. Okay, so I can't read that. I can read it from. Okay, I can read it from here. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this. This is our what do you call this?
Land acknowledgement.
Land acknowledgement that we always read whenever we do a Golden Wheel event. And Colin put this up here, and I'm really happy he did. I want to read it because these are people that we're acknowledging that would have been called pagans, and not by themselves though. They wouldn't call them that, but that's kind of the name that was given to them. So in honor of that, I want to read this. Happy Valley Golden Wheel is located on and operates upon the original homelands of the Erie, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Shawnee, Susquehannock, and Wazazi nations, in what we now call Pennsylvania. We acknowledge a history of displacement, violence, genocide, and exploitation that led to the society in which we live. We wish to acknowledge the original inhabitants of these lands, their robust cultures and beliefs, and the harm that they endured. We use this moment to reflect on this legacy and how we can honor it, learn from it, and support the healing of the harms that still exist. All right, let us go to the first slide. All right, first of all, what does pagan mean? So what I've done in this slide is I've tried to distinguish between a couple different terms here. Yeah, it's all good. So historic paganism. So, okay, first of all, most important thing to understand is that there is no continuous pagan traditions. I shouldn't say no, but with asterisks, no. Pagan traditions that are continuous from when they were practiced in pre-Christian times up to today. That does not exist in most places. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but almost everywhere has been touched by, incursions by other belief systems that has changed it or, tampered with it in some way. So just let's be aware of that. First of all, when we say pagans, modern pagans, the term really is neo-pagan. But honestly, modern pagans hate that term. Yes, I do. Because, it sort of distances you from the sources you're trying to get back to. But it is important to realize that nobody has a continuous tradition. No matter what they claim or whatnot, there's always been something, there's been changes. So historic paganism is what I call this, is what we're talking about with the paganism that existed in ancient times. Before there were monotheisms, kind of taken over everything. That's historic paganism. And these beliefs are more or less known or not. It depends on if they wrote things down. If they didn't write things down and there was not a recording of an oral tradition, a lot of these traditions have been lost, which is highly unfortunate. But that's kind of the state of things. So the next term, paganus, that's a Latin. I think it's Latin. It means a bumpkin. It means a redneck, pretty much. So where does this come from? Well, it's the idea that the people who still practiced paganism were people apart from the cities, apart from the centers of learning, where monotheisms were obviously the thing to do, and were kind of linked with the ideas of progress, culture, technology. Basically getting out of the dark ages into this age of enlightenment, and the pagans were the ones who got left behind. It's a Latin term, and the pagani in Italian means the rural folk, of Italy. And that's kind of where this comes from. There's also other terms such as heathen, and that one comes from the term that was applied, I believe, to the Pictish people, the people of the heaths, who would live in northern UK versus the people who live in the southern UK, right, who were proper Christians, but the heathens lived in the heath, up there. So there's all kinds of terms like that that kind of link pagans to the land, which is kind of interesting. There's a connection between people who are living closer to nature, which is, by and large, has been true and is still true today, that pagans do try to live closer to the rhythms of nature. Okay, so paganism, neo-paganism, modern religious spiritual movements inspired by continuation or reconstruction beliefs and practices of original pagan traditions. Yeah, so I'm going to go into the history slide in a second here, but basically everything you see today has been reconstructed at best. I shouldn't say at best. It's been fused. It's been infused with modern ideas and modern takes. Even modern pagans, usually you're not raised pagan. Usually not. Usually we come to it from different belief systems that we import into that in various ways, which has been really interesting. I think kind of fruitful to see that happening. But yeah, so that's paganism. Neo-paganism refers to the state of paganism as it is today. And a pagan is a I should just say non-Christian, non-monotheist, generally. There can be Christo-pagans. There can be people who have kind of split beliefs. It's a tricky term. And what we're calling pagan, also be aware that, the people who would be practicing these historic paganism would never call themselves this term. It's kind of a derogatory term in many ways, and a lot of people have issue with it for that reason. Sometimes I've been to situations where I've gone to like New Age events where we called ourselves pagans, and we got some blowback for that. They're like, "Oh, you're pagans," nobody wants to be a pagan. Like, what is that? So just be aware that there is, kind of sometimes there's a negative thing around this term, but at the same time we use it because it's handy. And it honestly, pagan just is such a huge umbrella term. It can encompass so many different kind of beliefs that we're going to talk about in a second here. So that's the orientation lecture. All right, next. All right, so modern paganism, this is where it began, 1800s, okay? So anything it's saying is going back before 1800s in Europe, maybe not, maybe there's an old witch in your family that's, that passed it on orally through your female line. I don't know, man, but, recorded though, not exist. There was actually kind of a fraud that was perpetrated by one Charles Leland. He was trying to document the existence of a witch cult in Italy. And that was his books on Aradia, the goddess of the witches. That was really one of the rallying points of witchcraft in the 60s and 70s, was this idea that there was this continuous line. And what do I want to say? There was another famous anthropologist who was also claiming the same thing, Murray.
Yeah, Anne Marie Murray.
Yeah, okay. And, was claiming that. And, so there's an example right there of an origin mythology that really didn't exist. It is not at all demonstrated with any kind of evidence that this exists. Okay, so 1800s is really where we can point to some of the stuff coming up, and where it was coming from was Romanticism. So Romanticism was a reaction against the industrialization of Europe and US and everywhere, and it was kind of a back to nature, kind of a hippie movement actually, where people were trying to get out to nature and write poetry and experience the mystic divine. There's a lot of different traditions of romantics, but they were spurring that on. You ever read like Ralph Waldo Emerson? He was, here's a name for his tradition, but that was the sort of thing though. People went out and got inspired by nature again. They go out and they find these ruins. And actually this period, this architectural period, there was a lot of incorporation of ruins into landscapes, just because it brought back that feeling, of connection with the classical period. So, and you see that in the paintings as well. Anyway, so let's see here. Yeah, the 1800s, that romantic movement was happening. Now, there was also a very large movement into secret societies in the Victorian era. There was a big surge of this. There was also spiritualism too. There was these really kind of intense, movements to practice magic and contact spirits, through all kinds of different means. It's a fascinating study if you ever want to look at this stuff. But there were some things back then that were forged. Now, Freemasonry actually has earlier roots than like the Golden Dawn. But the Golden Dawn, that's actually my tradition. And that was a society of magicians that was trying to syncretize a whole bunch of Western magic together. And it was a huge influence, a huge, like a driving mechanism, a driving wheel into the promulgation of occult material, and yeah. Druidic orders, so they were kind of playing around with Druidry back then, kind of like Reconstructionism a little bit. I don't know a whole lot about that, but I know that they were trying to take whatever was it Tacitus or someone like wrote about the Druids and trying to put it into some kind of format. And then later orders would be ADF and OBOD, the two modern Druid orders would kind of go off of that. But there was some of that kind of movement. Kabbalah, that's a complicated one. Kabbalah actually, that goes into the secret societies and the magic people. But anyway, so the point is that there was a lot of, a lot of different interest in magic at that time. Romantic nationalist quotations in the 30s and 40s. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit dark because some of this romanticism and this looking back into the grand past of the nations was feeding into some kind of bad nationalist tendencies. Of course, what are we thinking of? Germany, of course. Like Wagner's works, that were so romanticized, visions of the great German soul, is an excellent example of what that was about. And the paintings they had back then were these glorified, portraits of Odin and Thor, and just like this mega imagination. So, but there were some bad things with that fed into some ideologies that were quite, destructive. So that kind of happened back then. I would say that one of the big touch points in the 50s was Gerald Gardner, who founded Wicca. And he said he got it from a one Dorothy Clutterbuck, who was supposed to be this lineage witch that he got this information from and then made a witch order. And that's not true. That is actually one of those great falsehoods, but that's where Wicca took off. And Wicca was one of the big fountains, and it became really popular in the UK first, and then it came over to the US in the 60s, and that came with the New Age movement. Everybody was dropping acid and having a good time, and into astrology, into tarot. People were really, really into all of this, and this just blew up, along with witchcraft. In the 70s, Wicca became much more of a feminist ideological machine, I guess what you call it. It was popularized by Z Budapest, Starhawk. Some of the great feminist witches really brought it. Made it more of a thriving tradition back then in the 70s. 80s was kind of like a dead zone, but there was a lot of books and TV and happening going on with the occult, and the media has actually pushed it very, very much in the past, in like modern times, into the modern period. And now we got TikTok, where everyone's like a witch on TikTok now, and spewing the bad advice. So modern paganism, in short, is very new. It's really not an old thing. It's really a new invention, but we attempt to base it on older models as best as reconstruction as people can. Or we just kind of fuse it and, kind of take this and this and this. I don't judge, it's what people want to do with their paganism. There's all kinds of stuff out there. But that's the facts of where it came from and how old it is and where we are with that. Okay, next one, please. Any questions? Anyone has any questions? Anyone on Zoom too? I'll pause for a second in case anyone wants to ask something. I don't know if people are muted. Is there a chat?
Yep, we've got a chat. One person said that they have an ancestor who is a Freemason. So
yeah, Freemasonry. Now that's a really interesting little, thing right there, because a lot of people had brand as a Freemason, right? Freemasonry was everywhere. I actually have a slide about that coming up here. I'll talk more about it. All right, so some features of paganism. So yeah, pantheism, polytheism. Okay, so there's a star right here too, because like I said, there are Christo-pagans. There are people who have monotheistic style beliefs, but are also considered as pagan. There's also people who have professed Christian beliefs, but do pagan practices. There really isn't a hard and fast line here. Whether you believe in many gods or one god. Now, strict polytheism is where you do not believe in a overall arching creator god. That is relatively more rare. It's not something that we really grow up with thinking is a thing, because a lot of us come from monotheistic backgrounds. That's just how it is, and that's how a lot of people think. As of in terms of a divine force. But again, it depends. It depends on what tradition you're doing. Yeah, pantheism too. That's another one. That's another nuance of belief where you believe everything is sacred, everything is God. And that's another facet of that belief. Magic focused. Okay, so pagans practice magic, not across the board. Some people do, some people don't. And magic is okay. What are you considering magic? Do you consider prayer magic? Do you consider, stirring your soup in a clockwise manner as a magical act? Right? There's some things that are very subtle that may not be considered magic by someone looking on the outside, but may be considered by the person doing it to be a magical thing. So I would say generally a magical viewpoint is what they have in common, that magic is possible and it is practiced and it is legitimate. It's not evil. It is something that can be positive, that can be very helpful. And some people go very deeply into it. So yeah, magic focused for sure. Earth-centered, generally, yeah, I think so. It gets more abstract with some versions, some branches of paganism, but generally, Earth-centered is a good way to put it. Like I said, a lot of pagans will link their what they do throughout the year with the yearly cycles, with the solar or lunar cycles. They will do certain things at certain times, right? So they'll link themselves to the cosmic cycles. Many pagans are very into nature, love to grow gardens, love to, pick the weeds and all of that stuff, which is really nice. Also, a lot of pagans are very concerned about the environment, very concerned, and really want to be stewards of the world a lot better than we have been so far. And that's a point of appeal for a lot of people. In fact, I noticed that some Christian churches are emphasizing that a lot more in their services, which is interesting, and I think that's awesome, and it's a good change. Okay, so earth-centered. See, decentralized. Yeah, paganism does not have a central church. There's no church of pagan totality anywhere. It's just like, what is this group doing? What is this group doing? What is this group doing? And there's so many different takes on it that it can never really organize into something. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because it allows individual expression and to follow the paths you want to follow. It's bad in that when push comes to shove, there's not a lot of cohesion to protect the interests of people who consider themselves pagan. They're not working together. So it can be good or bad. But yeah, decentralized for sure. This is a problem we've had in Golden Wheel. One of our objectives is to try to centralize a little bit so we have some ability to pool resources and, when the chips are down, to protect people who want to practice pagan beliefs in a, as a minority, right? So trying to do that. Okay. Personal, yeah, it's personal. Generally personal. Some traditions are less personal, but people usually will find something that works for them. They'll have a personal practice, in various amounts of complexity, I would say. Syncretic. Okay, so syncretic, maybe. Some traditions stay really into what they do, and they don't do fusion or anything like that. But it's more common for people to kind of take things from this and that and that. That's the personal aspect of this is to be able to take things and put them together. That I would say is the most popular form of practicing paganism, is to kind of put things together that make sense to you, and be syncretic. To be able to see a connection between the Norse gods and the Celtic gods, like they're not completely separate, or the Orisha and the saints in Santeria, it's very syncretic. Though again, I'm not I'm careful not to call them pagans because they call themselves Christians. You know, they profess as Christians. So I would not include them, but practice-wise, I mean, voodoo, Santeria, hello. That's so, it is such heavy magic. So yeah, so syncretism can happen in different ways, but yeah, we don't say, okay, here's the Bible of paganism, and thou shalt not change a word within it. We find different myths, different stories, different things that inspire us, and we make them into a living spirituality. Okay, roots of many magical systems. Yep, you betcha. Though again, there can be some syncretism between them. There can be some, putting this into that and this into that. And again, it's like some traditions do that, and some don't. Mine does not. I'm a Golden Dawn magician, and we do not mix things in our rituals. It is what it is, But that's kind of a separate thing than a lot of pagan practices. So other people will freely throw things in. Let's see. Immediate, I would say imminent. I probably should be imminent rather than transcendental. So what that means is that pagans believe that deity is all around and everything all the time. It is here, and it can have interaction and expression in a physical plane versus a transcendent God, which cannot be reached by humans. A separation of spirit and matter, right? That is a typical monotheistic belief that there is a great gap between you and the divine. Pagans think, no, divine's right here. My altar is full of gods. It's full of a holy presence that I can bring in and experience. Yeah, I would call that the Gnostic leanings of paganism, in that you can experience the divine, within what you do, and don't have to have an intermediary. You don't have to have a priest. I mean, some traditions, again, that's different, but generally you don't have to have an intermediary. So. Let's see, minority. Yeah, we're a minority, big one. We're like 10% people professing paganism.
There's only a couple million in the world, like less than 3 million, I think.
Really, that few? Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's some percentage like that in the U.S. It's not a large percentage, so we are deeply in the minority. Tend to get blamed for stuff sometimes that we don't do. It can be problematic, but I really highly believe in building, relationships with majority religions, and trying to not be antagonistic, to be, try to understand what we have in common, because there's a lot in common. There really is. A lot of monotheists will think very pagan sometimes, and vice versa. So it's not that big a gap. Yeah.
You just mentioned that sometimes you get blamed for certain things. Can you give an example of what they would?
Satanic panics happen every so often, Now, Satanism, that is it pagan? Some branches, definitely yes. I would say definitely yes. And it looks weird, right? People who are sporting pentacles, right, might be considered to be untrustworthy or suspect or something. I mean, try sporting a pentacle when you go to like a parent-teacher conference or something, and they don't know you're a pagan. Other parents are going to look at that like, ooh, they worship the devil, and that's what what happens. We're in a majority Christian country, and pagans have been railed against for a long time. It's only recently that it's been okay to even stick your head out, and many pagans are in the closet big time because they're going to lose their job, they're going to come under suspicion. It's going to be bad if people find out, and that is a reality most pagans want to change, because this country is we should have freedom of religion.
We have a question of how do these traditions define magic?
How these traditions define magic? Oh, there's so many definitions of magic. So I would say a common way to conceptualize it is that you do something on Earth, in your space, that whatever it is you do in your ritual that you formulate is meant to affect a larger pattern. It's meant to be able to reach that, reach out of just moving things around an altar and reflect a larger truth. And that's the imminence of divinity right there, that you can actually reach that and it will come and answer you and do things. So I think that's a real bare bones conception of that. I mean, if you ask a Wiccan versus a Druid versus a Golden Dawn magician, you're going to get some different answers as to what it actually is. So yeah, that's the best I can do right now for that. All right, we got it. All right, we're going to talk about some of these. So we're trying to get the major branches of modern paganism. So I think these are mostly what they are. Most people who call themselves pagans are one of these things. And when Reconstructionism, they might actually call themselves a Reconstructionist Celtic witch or something like that. So they might be blended. There are heathen Celtics. There are shamanistic druids. There are, hermetic witches for sure. There's all kinds of mixtures here. They are not hard and fast categories, but this is the major streams, I would say, of what pagans do these days. So I have, let's see, we have some pictures, and I can talk about these. And this is actually from my old pagan group, and I'm just gonna read this because it's just easier for me to just read this thing. I didn't have much time to put the thing together, y'all. So we'll go into Wicca first. I'll just read this, then we'll talk about it. Wicca. Let's see, a modern pagan spiritual path founded in Britain in the early 20th century. That was Gerald Gardner. Now spread worldwide, Wicca has a distinct set of rituals, customs, and beliefs that differentiates it from other forms of paganism. It has itself influenced a lot of other paths and is possibly the biggest and most publicly visible kind of paganism in the Western world. I would say definitely yes. Wicca covers a vast spectrum from the strictly traditional to free-form eclectic variants, with a mutually shared core structure of belief practice used at individual or coven discretion. This includes a god and goddess casting circles, drawing down the moon, sabbats, esbats, skyclad, and the law of threefold return. Okay, so it's just rattling off some different things here. Then they're saying there's two branches of Wicca. Traditional Wicca refers to Gardnerian, Alexandrian, or another form of Wicca, usually predating the 1970s. So Wicca actually has roots in ceremonial magic. It actually comes via Aleister Crowley. Believe it or not, that is who kind of got together with Joe Gardner and actually constructed the format of Wicca. You guys ever seen anyone ever familiar with Wiccan practices, drawing circles, pentagrams, altars? Okay, well that's Wicca. That's what you're most likely going to see if you watch movies like The Craft. That was the big one in the 90s. That was ooh, it's Wicca. You'll see Wicca represented. So traditional Wiccans are often oath-bound, requiring formal training and initiation to participate in a coven. So the coven is your group that you participate with. There's no more than 13 people in a coven. And it is initiated. So it is not open to public participation. It is a secret society. And that's where it gets its roots from. Ceremonial magic, the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, right, was bringing in the secret society stuff into Wicca. That's where it started. Now, it became eclectic Wicca. Eclectic Wicca uses the core structure of traditional Wicca and incorporates non-Wiccan components. The eclectic elements might come from other pagan paths and beyond. A lot of eclectic paths, both pagan and Wiccan, have their origins in the 1970s, a time when there was growing interest in alternative beliefs and resulting cross-pollination between paganism, the New Age movement, and Eastern ideas. Pretty good summary right there. Yeah, so that's what happened with, it began as a very ceremonial, initiatory, secret thing that was happening, and then it became infused with New Age ideas. It began to pull this and this, because everybody's cut out to be in a secret society, y'all. I mean, it takes, when you have to do all this work and that work and do these rituals and blah, blah. Some people just want to go out and, cast a circle and draw down the moon, and not have to go through all the rigmarole. And that's kind of what happened. It kind of widened out into the more general populace instead of being sequestered. And that's what happens with a lot of these traditions. They sort of start as a little think tank, a little cabal, so to speak, where people will get together a certain format, and then they'll start to bring it out of the shadows, and then it's going to start bringing in different influences in there. And that's when it starts to syncretize and become eclectic. And then the controversy starts when it's like people are like, oh, that's not how you do that. You know, you're doing it wrong. You know, and people are like, well, you guys are fascists. You're repressing our freedom of practice. You know, all these fights happen all the time. So, yeah. Any questions about Wicca or anything? Because I know I rattled through a lot of stuff here. Okay, this is like I said, this is the one you're going to see most frequently. Whenever you're in a public ceremony, people are calling quarters, they're drawing a circle. That is based on Wicca. Silver Circle did most things based on Wicca back in the 90s because everybody was a Wiccan back then. Nowadays, there's much fewer Wiccans, in my opinion. I think it's really gone down in popularity, but it's still a pretty good framework. All right, so yes, these are people. So this would be a public ceremony right here. I just pulled these from Wikipedia, whatever they had on Wicca and stuff. So they had some other pictures too, but anyway. So they have a big old pentagram made of brooms, which is pretty dope if you ask me. All tricked out, looks like Mayday or something. Or Beltane in Minnesota, so it's still snowing. All right, cool. No questions. We'll go on to the next. Okay, heathenry / Asatru. Okay, so heathenry. Let me find. So this is Northern European paganism, more or less Reconstructionist. Mileage may vary here. Okay, this covers a wide variety of cultural groups: Scandinavia, Germany, Netherlands, Baltic regions, and England. Indeed, anywhere where a Germanic tongue such as English is spoken. The most well-known of the modern northern paths is Asatru, meaning essentially true to the Aesir. The Aesir are a certain class of gods in Norse mythology. However, there are many more ever-evolving paths. Followers of such paths generally identify as heathen, as it is a Germanic word. These are usually strongly polytheistic and devoted to the Aesir and or Vanir. Honor, truthfulness, hospitality are considered as important character traits. Runes also play an important cultural role. Despite the stereotypical portrayal of macho Vikings, the male and female are equally important in the northern paths. Okay, so yeah, heathenry. And this is what you would probably wear at a heathen ceremony. So they're going to be worshiping in a much more polytheistic way than I would say Wiccans would. The Norse practitioners believe in separate gods. There's Odin, there's Thor, there's Freya, there's Freyr, Loki, on and on. There's a bunch of gods, and there's this whole saga of what the gods do and what they're going to do at the end of the world, Ragnarok. So yeah, there's all kinds of different ceremonies we do with heathenry. Golden Wheel actually has a pretty good heathen corpus. We actually do some rituals around that. It's very much community based, very much values individual action and honor and virtue, and you bring that into the community. And that's the power of this path. Now, there's a problem with this one, though. Some of you might be aware of this, that certain sects of people have really co-opted this and made it into a thing it's not. Some of the, for instance, you see some runes being flown by neo-Nazis, I think it was Othila or something, right?
It's generally Othelaz.
Othelaz, yeah. Yeah, so there is a branch of this path which is not one that most pagans like to associate with. And whenever you meet someone, who says they're heathen or Asatru, like, okay, which one are you? Everyone wants to know that first, are you the okay kind or are you the skinhead kind, right? So this is a problem with this path, but of course it does not at all invalidate this as a spiritual path. It's just it is part of the shadow part of this we fight. So yeah, do you have anything else to add, Colin, or because I know you talk this a lot?
I think it's really just like any belief system. There are people who are going to take it and use it poorly or abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens that in many cases, being a minority religion, that's what it's most associated with, rather than the majority of people who are practicing it, who are perfectly,
definitely.
decent humans.
Definitely, yeah. I would say the majority of practitioners are awesome people. It's just always, if you see, somebody professing Asatru who is, a neo-Nazi, most heathens are not cool with that, not at all. So, okay, so that's heathenry. Next one is Druidry. All right, so druids and Druidry. Druidry is another complex term with a variety of meanings that could refer to historical Druids of ancient Celtic Europe or a variety of contemporary spiritual paths. Historically, Druids functioned as priests, judges, and teachers. During the 18th century, the notion of Druidry became heavily romanticized and thus reinvented. This revival influenced modern pagan Druidry. Druidry is not exclusively Celtic, nor is it an ongoing ancient practice. Okay, so what is a Druid? Okay, some Druid paths continue with what the 18th century Druid revival began. However, such groups are not strictly pagan. So there are Reconstructionist Druids. However, there's not very much material out there to reconstruct Druidry from. So whatever they're getting, I don't know if they're like digging deep into the archaeological archives and doing the research. They might be doing that, but they're actually trying to reconstruct what it is that they were doing. Some Druid paths are eclectic and syncretic and use a variety of elements, particularly shamanism, to create a body of rituals and lore. The focus is on personal experience and aggressiveness. And a third example, overlapping with Celtic Reconstructionism, uses contemporary academic thought to gain insights into practicing historically conscious kind of modern Druidry. So the main groups of modern Druidry would be, how do you say it? ADF, or how do you say it?
Arndrug Fane.
Arndrug Fane, thank you very much. So Arndrug Fane, and this was founded in 1970s by a man by the name of Isaac Bonowitz. And he passed recently. He's one of the great pagan elders. Actually, was fortunate enough to see him before he died. But yeah, he founded ADF in the 1970s. And it was never considered to be Reconstructionist. It was a new take on an old idea of unity with the earth and with different magical rituals. It's kind of ceremonial, but it's also, I don't know, it's kind of mystic too. I don't know, what would you say it was like?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much built to be a modern religion.
Yeah.
Really like some form, a lot of people who are pagan will identify as spiritual.
Uh-huh.
ADF is a religion, like hardcore.
Okay, that's the difference right there. Yeah. So there's another one too called OBOD, OBOD, and that was founded in the early 20th century by Ross Nichols, and it is a cross-pollination of ideas between Nichols and Gerald Gardner. So it's kind of a Wiccan-y form of Druidry that's more practiced in Europe, UK in particular. So American Druids and European Druids are usually not the same thing usually. And the OBOT people tend to lord it over the ADF people, saying that they got the real, this is the real stuff over there. But whatever, that's another fight. There's so many fights amongst these groups, dudes. It's just like, it's on and on. This is Stonehenge right here. So here's, these are probably OBOT Druids, and they have giant festivals at Stonehenge every year, which is on my bucket list for sure. If anybody can get out there for for Beltane, that would be amazing. Or any of the solstices, I can do it all times of the year. So, okay, so that's Druidry. No questions, right? We've got any questions? Good. Okay. Reconstructionism. Let's see here. So this is Hellenic Reconstructionism. And this is Reconstructionists actually doing a reconstructed Hellenic ritual in an actual temple. That's not there anymore, but somehow they were able to get the use of that. How are we doing on time?
We've got 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay. So I won't read this out, but, basically there's all kinds of Reconstructionist people that are doing, stuff like this. Celtic, which is not the Druids, but other Celtic practices. Hellenic, which refers to Italian and Greek. Slavic is actually really a thing right now. People are getting into that. Mesopotamian, that's a big current. Egyptian is a big current. So people are trying to actually bring these things back and do them like they used to be done, with more or less success, perhaps. But that's an endeavor. I mean, look at this. They have all these tricked out and all these costumes, and they probably have everything memorized, and it's this big drama. Look, there's like tents, there's like people everywhere. I mean, that's pretty dope if you ask me. But that one, Reconstructionism takes a lot of effort. All right. Hermeticism. Okay, so this is controversial. Hermeticism refers to this very old philosophical strain that goes back to Egypt. And this teacher named Hermes Trismegistus, which is why it's called Hermetic. Hermes is also the god of wisdom in Greek mythology as well. So Hermeticism is basically an idea of, let's say, a mystic, Gnostic, divine interaction between humans and God, you know, and that has taken the form of many different religions or spiritual paths. Freemasonry is one of them. Now, Freemasons would never consider themselves pagan. They would say, no, no, we're Christians, you know. But if you know anything about Freemasonry, you see their rituals, you see what they do. I mean, you're like, okay, yeah, you're totally Christian. There's no whatever, y'all. But they do like things like sacred mathematics. Pythagoras was a great contributor to Hermeticism. The divinity of numbers, the Kabbalah, is definitely part of this path. Again, they would never consider themselves pagan, but this strain is very important in modern paganism. It's filtered into a lot of different things. The Golden Dawn, I would say, is the major source point for a lot of this coming into Western paganism. People are studying ceremonial magic, they're studying Kabbalah, they're studying tarot. Tarot is definitely part of the Hermetic tradition. Tarot, astrology comes from all of this. Hermeticism was actually originally meant to mean all of learning, all knowledge. Hermes being the god of knowledge, everything you could possibly know about the world, you know, and understand about humans and the divine was Hermeticism. So anyway, this is controversial though. Some Hermetics do consider themselves pagan. Some do not. Many do not. Many consider themselves monotheists. But the monotheism they profess is often would be viewed quite heretical by orthodoxies of their tradition, whatever they're claiming they are. So yeah, so that's a kind of the Hermeticism. All right, next one, please. Shamanistic practices. Okay, so I'm saying shamanistic here. Shamanism is really belongs to the native peoples of Siberia. And this is interesting. This is a compilation that I got off of Wikipedia of different indigenous shamanic images right here of different peoples to do this. So we got I think the what do you call the Laps in Finland, the Lap people.
Sami is the
Samis, Eskimos, definitely, they're all part of a shamanic tradition. And I would say Native American as well, pretty much partakes in shamanism. And this is something that is very attractive to a lot of pagans, you know, these practices. And we know a group that does shamanistic practice down in Huntington, actually. It's pretty awesome what they do. So, you know, I like to draw a distinction between properly shamanic and shamanistic, taking inspiration from shamanism, but not actual shamanism, to not appropriate those cultural traditions. So shamanistic practices, they involve usually trance work, usually use a drum. And the idea is that you're going out out of your body pretty much, and you are able to journey into the larger realm of spirit via these practices of drumming, meditation, fasting, sometimes imbibing substances that allow you to more easily do this, right? So yeah, this is not, I would say, there's not a proper organization doing this. This is usually small groups that do shamanistic practices, and they just kind of have their experiences together. So it deserves to be recognized as a strain in this, but it's not going to be a school or a certain organization with shamanistic practice. Okay, we're almost there. Eclecticism, syncretism. This is probably the thing you're going to see most. If you go to a pagan festival, you go to any kind of pagan event, Golden Wheel is eclectic and syncretic. So basically, you do whatever it is you do. You know, if you want to get up there and cast a circle and call quarters and then call the Norse gods and then draw down the moon. You know what I mean? This is what happens, and it's great. I think it's great. I love to see the creativity. It's humans just expressing their spiritual selves in very manifest creative ways, and that's the real strength of paganism, is to be able to allow that kind of exploration and open-mindedness and willingness to experience new things, new influences, and to open up to the world. And that's the real strength of it. Now, the weakness is sometimes you will start doing things like fusing systems together that don't really belong together, or appropriating from other cultures you really don't understand, or aren't a part of, or you're just basically fucking around with, some grimoire or something, and conjuring spirits. That's where you go wrong with this. So there is a weakness too that must be tempered with that freedom. So that's usually where I stand with this. I'm an order magician, so I'm much more of a structured person, but at the same time, I recognize the need for that freedom, and I respect it. I like to see it too. And unless it's too, they call it woo. Sometimes I'll do some of that stuff. But this is usually what you'll see, is this kind of thing coming out. And we have a big New Age community actually in Bellefonte and Bollesburg. There's a bunch of shops and things that, pretty much cater to this. Your general New Age shop will do this. So, all right, I'm sorry I've talked so much. These are some of our classes and events. Runic Wheel doesn't exist anymore, but there's an EDF Grove in its place, Proto Grove. So, but we do Bronze Ring, which is classes, like basic classes in magic and paganism. First Tuesday every month at Webster's at 7:30. We have all this on the Golden Wheel website, but last time we just did it this week, and we did ethics, magical ethics. That was a good class. We had a good debate as to what constitutes like proper ethics for magical use. Astrology is next week. And then I do a series called Keys of Magic, which is my series on ceremonial magic, Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, the Western esoteric tradition is what I teach. So, okay, I'm sorry. I don't have any questions. Rambled on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So did you start to partake in like paganistic beliefs when you came to Penn State, or did you?
Actually, I did.
Okay. So can you tell me more about that?
Oh, I went to an embalmment fair. I think it was wintertime, so I came in the winter semester, and there was a large hairy dude in a tie-dye t-shirt. I was terrified of this guy. He had a big torque around his neck. And he's like, "Hey, do you want to be a pagan?" And I was like, "Ooh, what are you guys?" And I grabbed a flyer and I ran away. But then I showed up to Silver Circle, and I started figuring out what it was. And yeah, I just never looked back. I was just like, "Yeah, this is where I'm at." I started with Wicca. Everyone started with Wicca though back in the 90s. But then I slowly realized I want to do some more ceremonial. So that's when I started going down that path. Yeah, but we did a lot of cool ceremonies here over the years. We have kind of a cool slideshow that shows us doing rituals through the 90s and the 2000s. We got a lot of documentation of things we've done here. So Penn State's actually kind of a hotspot for pagan beliefs. So I know. Yeah.
Why do you think that paganism isn't more commonly passed down through families like some other religions?
It is when pagans get together. It's just like it's just not. It's such a minority. Usually, someone who grows up pagan usually doesn't become a Christian. You see, if you go to festivals, you'll see families, like whole families, that are all pretty much some flavor of pagan. Plus, also, there's not like a single church to join. Like your mom might be Celtic, you might be more Hermetic. Like this kid might be more Hermetic. This one might be agnostic atheist and say screw all that stuff. This other kid might be, like much more hardcore witch. It all depends, like what they get into. But there's no bonding family tradition generally. So there are fam trads. There are fam trads, but they're relatively uncommon in my opinion. Yeah.
If there's something in the chat, I don't know.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So paganism seems to encompass a lot of different things, and so I know you probably can't answer for everyone, but do you, in your personal beliefs, whereas paganism as a whole, how many people do you think believe in like an objective truth or like right way to do things?
I don't know. I mean, an objective truth. See, pagans just kind of shy away from that. Most pagans realize that they have their own take on it, and it's not the take that they grew up with oftentimes, and they respect other people's ability to have their own take. That's again one of the strengths of paganism. Like we never enforce and say, oh, this is the right way to do it, blah blah blah. And they might say, if you're in a more structured system, like if you are doing the rituals wrong, and it's known that no, they're done like this, then it's like, okay, well, but it's like you don't say like, no, your belief's wrong. We're not based on a salvation via belief. That is a Christian Protestant way of thinking of how to be right with the divine. Also, like Jewish belief is practice based. You have to practice properly to be a proper Jew, and it's absent from paganism, unless you put it there. And you want to be that strict and careful with yourself. Or some do, but you would never say like, no, you didn't do what I do, so you're wrong. Yeah. Good.
You go first. Okay. Is there like an afterlife, like across pagan
It depends from place to place. The Norse people think they're going to Helheim or where else?
Valhalla.
Valhalla. Well, you don't want to go to Valhalla.
I don't want to go to Valhalla, but
Valhalla
there are a
kinda
lot of
sucks.
people who want to go to Valhalla.
There's a concept of the Summerlands, in Wicca, the great, beautiful, place you go after you die. Reincarnation, though, is very common. That belief is very common with pagans. And that belief is actually reaching, it's kind of spreading, it's been spreading for a while. And you see all kinds of people believe in reincarnation, you wouldn't think would, but I'd say that's pretty common, for most pagans. Yeah, go ahead.
So in a lot of religions, there's this concept of evangelism because some religions think, we have the thing that's the best and that's going to benefit, so they want to spread it. Would you say that paganism has any sort of evangelistic or like desire to
No.
tell more people about paganism?
Well, I mean, we like to have more, like people let people know that it exists, but we would never evangelize. I don't know. I mean, what are we going to evangelize? We just see like all these different things, right? We just see this many-sided die, like a D20. It's all for a lot of pagans. It's all a one sacred thing, but it's like you come this way and that way and that way and that way, but they're all the same thing. You're just looking at a different way. So why would I tell you to look at it a different way if this way works for you better? More often what happens is like someone will just like go to a ritual and say, hey, I'm really into what you're doing. Like, can you tell me more about it? And they'll kind of start wending their way into that one if it speaks to them. That's more what happens. But it's never like, you need to believe this or that. That's not what pagans do at all. Yeah. We get a little upset when people do it to us, but like, yeah, okay, whatever. you believe what you believe. And we don't believe Christians shouldn't believe what they believe, or Muslims or Jews. We don't believe that they're wrong. It's just not how we practice either. We don't think they should all become pagans. No, everyone should do what they want to do. And a lot of people need that kind of large community structure to be happy. That's cool. But some people are just freaking black sheep. They need to go do something totally different, and just be individuals. And paganism allows that, to be individual and to be connected to the earth, connected to like the nature cycles. And that's something that's really missing in modern life, especially in the age of social media, right? And screen time, being off the charts. That connection to nature is something people crave. I would say across the board, to be more connected. So yeah, that's how we evangelize. We go outside for a walk.
So we have one question
Sure.
on the Zoom before we get finished today.
Certainly, yeah.
So what are the ethical beliefs of paganism?
Oh boy, we just had a big conversation about that. Yeah, that's one of them right there. Is to I would say not try to push your beliefs on somebody else. I think that's a big one. Care for the earth is another broad, overreaching one. Let's see, what other ethical considerations? So with magic, generally there's considerations about not harming people and trying not to do things without consent of the other party. Though, I mean, if you look at TikTok, you'd be like, witches of TikTok. It's just like, God damn, there needs to be discussion here about consent and, not doing love spells and whatever on other people and cursing people. Like, geez. But generally, that is an ethic. You don't do negative magic against people. You don't, mess with, try to get people to date you with magic, whatever. What else? I think it's take care for community, because we're a minority and we really, we feel it when someone, when, other people are like, yeah, I can't come out in my job because I'm going to lose it. I have to stay in the closet or my family's going to disown me or whatever. And that creates a real sense of, communitas with pagans, because we're all kind of in this together, especially in the 90s. It was really strong in the 90s, because there was like satanic panics in the 80s, people thought we were all evil and stuff. Meanwhile, we're trying to espouse feminism and, positive viewpoints and stuff. We're trying to be a good family for each other. So I think that's really important too. We're often our chosen families is often a thing that I hear. So yeah, I would say family values, chosen family values. What else? What else, Colin? Anyway,
Generally, concern about like social ethics.
social justice. Yeah,
Personal autonomy.
Yeah.
And, trying not to harm others in general.
Yeah, equality, social justice, help for oppressed peoples, anti-war, definitely. I would say pagans are very anti-war. The hippie values, the 60s, hippie values, but those evolved values of all humans as brothers, no need for people to kill each other over nationalist values and all that horse hockey. I think that's very strong with pagans. Not to say pagans aren't patriots. There's actually quite a lot of pagans in the military. But in terms of nationalistic kind of stuff, unless you're talking about the Nazis, the neo-Nazis and the skinheads and some of those fascists in Eastern Europe, generally not. No, they don't want to be associated with that. Yeah. Otherwise, it kind of goes from tribe to tribe as to what they value most, I would say. Yeah. So.
Alrighty. So thank you for joining us and speaking about paganism. And thank you everyone else for
Thanks for
joining us
coming.
today.
Yeah.
And we're going to end the session.